Catherine didn't walk into that study to start a fight. She walked in to end the silence that had been quietly suffocating her for months. And King Charles had no idea the entire foundation of his family was about to shift beneath his feet until she placed a single piece of paper on his desk and refused to hand it to him directly. You know how significant that gesture is, right? She didn't trust him enough to place it in his hand. That's where this whole thing starts. A briefing note, the kind of internal palace document used to track risks and approve messaging, landed on polished wood between a monarch and a future queen, and Charles had to read Camilla's handwritten instruction twice before his brain could even process what his eyes were seeing. Catherine's private medical recovery schedule, the most vulnerable information a woman can have while she's fighting to get her strength back, had been weaponized by the woman sitting beside him on the throne. Before we get into the truly devastating details of how this all unraveled, make sure you're subscribed to Prime Archive so you never miss these deep dives into the stories that actually matter. The specific detail that makes my blood run cold is the line Camilla wrote, "Establish the absence before the return." That is not clumsy damage control. That is not a worried stepmother overstepping. That is a calculated, cold-blooded strategy designed to make Catherine look too weak to ever stand beside William again before she even had the chance to prove otherwise. Camilla authorized a communications advisor named Julian Mercer to pass details of Catherine's condition and supposed doubts about her readiness directly to an outside media intermediary. The leak made the Princess of Wales appear fragile, unreliable, and potentially incapable of resuming her duties while simultaneously keeping Camilla highly visible as the monarchy's dependable female face. Catherine stood there, voice steady but pain unmistakable, and told Charles that the headlines weren't the deepest wound. The true betrayal was knowing that her private suffering had been turned into political material by someone who shared his bed. When she asked him whether loyalty to his wife mattered more than protecting the future queen, Charles looked away. That silence right there was the moment everything broke because silence stopped being neutral and started being a choice against her. The timeline of this whole disaster traces back to a Windsor gathering weeks earlier that everyone thought was just an ordinary private reception. William quietly revealed Catherine's first major return engagement date, a national service that would mark her formal return to sustained royal duty, and the room applauded. Charles smiled, genuinely relieved, and said Catherine's return would bring strength to the family after months of uncertainty. Camilla raised her glass and asked William to pass her affection to his wife, but her expression tightened when senior aides started discussing the coverage this return would attract. One advisor called Catherine the emotional future of the monarchy, and those words struck deeper than anyone realized because during Catherine's absence, Camilla had become the most visible senior woman in the institution. She'd led engagements, supported Charles through difficult appearances, and grown accustomed to being indispensable. Now that entire position could vanish in a single morning. Camilla waited until the applause faded before stepping into an adjoining room with her communications secretary. And this is where the scheme really crystallized. She claimed the palace was moving too quickly, warned that public disappointment would be severe if Catherine failed to maintain the schedule, and then approached Charles to urge him to slow everything down. Charles kissed her forehead, said the family should be grateful, and walked back toward his guests. His kindness felt like dismissal to her. She stood alone, unheard, and suddenly replaceable in her own mind. That feeling of being replaceable is what drove Camilla straight to Julian Mercer near the Windsor Library corridor. She told him the public needed to understand Catherine's limitations before expectations became impossible to control. Mercer asked point blank whether she was authorizing an external briefing, meaning information quietly passed outside the palace to shape coverage without becoming an official statement. She looked toward the closed reception doors, heard the laughter carrying from the gathering, and answered with those 5 devastating words: establish the absence before the return. Mercer opened a leather folder, slid an authorization page toward her, and Camilla hesitated for just a moment before signing her initials beneath the instruction. The pen paused once, but the ink still touched the paper. Sophie, the trusted confidant who has been quietly watching everything for years, entered the corridor moments later and saw Mercer closing that folder. She noticed Camilla's unsettled face, said nothing that night, but remembered everything. That memory would later become the corroborating evidence Charles couldn't ignore. Charles summoned his private secretary after Catherine left his study and issued a recorded instruction suspending Camilla from family strategy meetings immediately. He ordered every message connected to the briefing secured, no email was to disappear, no note was to be removed. William waited outside the closed door without sitting, and inside the monarch removed his glasses, placed his pen beside the document, and said something that still echoes through every palace corridor. She crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The secretary then revealed something even more disturbing. The note referred to an earlier Windsor conversation involving Camilla, 2 aides, and another figure whose role could turn a private betrayal into a constitutional crisis. Charles suddenly understood he couldn't confront his wife before grasping why Catherine's return had become threatening enough for Camilla to interfere with it in the first place. This was never simply about a leaked schedule. Behind that document stood 3 people carrying 3 completely different fears. Catherine feared her illness had been twisted into weakness. Camilla feared becoming invisible the moment Catherine returned. And Charles feared that choosing between them would reopen every wound his reign had tried so desperately to bury. What Camilla stole from Catherine wasn't just privacy, it was control. Catherine's return to public duty wasn't another royal engagement to tick off a calendar. It was her chance to reclaim agency after months in which doctors, courtiers, commentators, and complete strangers had spoken about her body, her strength, and her future as if she were a mannequin rather than a person. A royal engagement carries the weight of representing the monarchy officially, and this specific return was supposed to prove that she, not Palace Whispers, would decide when she was ready. The leaked schedule snatched that power at the worst possible moment. Camilla had spent those same months becoming the dependable female face of the institution, and Catherine's return threatened to shift attention back almost overnight. William saw the pain beneath his wife's calm expression and asked in a private sitting room whether she wanted him to confront Charles for her. Catherine refused. Her sadness was sharper than anger when she told the prince that if she couldn't defend her own dignity now, the palace would always treat her as someone to protect. That line has stayed with me because it reveals exactly who Catherine has become through this illness. Someone who understands that protection without respect is just another form of control. Charles carried a completely different burden. He remembered the years he'd spent defending Camilla against criticism and doubt, the public rejection, the courtiers who doubted her, the memory of the past that threatened their future. That history made the evidence almost unbearable for him. He felt betrayed by her choice, yet he also feared that disciplining her would confirm every accusation that personal love had once mattered more to him than royal duty. Camilla sensed the shift before anyone spoke to her directly. She discovered that access to the king's private diary had been restricted and noticed that a family meeting had vanished from her schedule without explanation. When she questioned an aide, the woman avoided her eyes and admitted the instruction had come directly from Charles. William then met the monarch alone and delivered a quiet warning that carried the full weight of the future king behind it. Catherine wanted no humiliation and no revenge, he said. She wanted a boundary that could never again be crossed. If Charles refused to create it, the Wales household would withdraw from joint planning with the central household entirely. Later, Camilla opened a revised schedule beside a tray of untouched tea and saw her name removed from the next morning's succession planning discussion. Her hand tightened around the page as memory dragged her back to Windsor. To the exact evening Catherine's return date was announced and her own temporary prominence began its inevitable fade. The confrontation that followed was brutal in its intimacy. Charles chose a smaller Buckingham Palace drawing room because he wanted no aides, no folders, and no formal machinery standing between them. A drawing room is meant for private conversations, not official events, and tonight its intimacy made every silence heavier. William sat beside his wife without touching the document, his rigid posture making one thing absolutely clear. Catherine was not facing this alone. The king placed the original briefing note at the center of the table and asked whether the initials belonged to Camilla. She looked at the page, then at him, and admitted approving the briefing. But her defense was immediate and revealing. She insisted Catherine's return had been moving too quickly, claimed the monarchy needed protection from the damage another sudden withdrawal might cause, and said her caution had been mistaken for cruelty. Catherine leaned forward and dismantled that defense with surgical precision. Concern, she said, would have meant coming directly to her, asking about her strength, and respecting her answer. Secretly sending details beyond the authorized circle was not protection. It was using illness to weaken someone before she could return. Her control broke only when she revealed that her children had seen headlines asking whether their mother would ever stand beside the family again. William lowered his eyes, then looked toward Camilla with anger he no longer tried to hide. Charles broke the silence that followed through a documented account prepared from Sophie's private recollection. Sophie had remembered seeing Camilla with Julian Mercer immediately after the Windsor announcement, and her statement matched the timing recorded in palace communications perfectly. The monarch explained that the chronology had been reconstructed and denial was no longer possible. Camilla turned sharply toward him, then back to Catherine, and under that pressure, her defense finally collapsed. She admitted she had feared becoming irrelevant once the princess resumed her place. She'd spent years fighting for acceptance, and now she could feel the institution preparing to move beyond her. Catherine pushed the note across the table and delivered the line that I think will define this entire chapter of royal history. "You were not being erased, but you tried to erase me before I returned." William looked down. Charles closed his eyes. Camilla reached toward the document, but her hand stopped before touching it. Catherine rose and told the king that private regret was no longer enough. He now had to decide whether his wife would keep access to information she had already shown herself willing to misuse. The evidence kept getting worse the deeper investigators dug. Security staff recovered a documented chain of messages from Julian Mercer's palace account, and what they found transformed this from a betrayal of trust into something approaching a coordinated campaign. 2 briefing drafts have been prepared. One questioned Catherine's health and stamina in explicit detail. The second proposed that Camilla receive additional long-term patronages if the princess's return proved unstable. A royal patronage gives a family member visibility, influence, and public importance, and this second draft revealed the full design. The leak hadn't merely lowered expectations around Catherine. It had created a path for Camilla to gain permanent influence, while the younger woman remained weakened. Charles read those messages twice, and I can only imagine what went through his mind as he saw the woman he defended against the entire world methodically planning to benefit from his daughter-in-law's suffering. He signed a directive removing Camilla from succession, health, and Wales household briefings. His pen rested on the final letter before he set it down and ordered the restriction to begin immediately. Minutes later, Camilla received a sealed envelope in her private sitting room. She recognized Charles's personal stationery before opening it, and the weight of the decision reached her before the words did. Camilla read the order once, then again as though the words might soften if she delayed believing them. They didn't. Her access to Catherine's health information was revoked. Her place in succession planning was suspended. Her communications authority over joint royal messaging was removed entirely. The queen remained beside the king in title, but the machinery behind the palace doors had begun moving without her, and everyone inside could feel the separation. Before breakfast the next morning, revised circulation lists reached every senior office. A circulation list decides who may receive confidential palace documents, and Camilla's name had vanished from files involving Catherine, William, and the Wales children. Her communication staff now needed written approval before even discussing the princess, while contact with outside media consultants was frozen pending review. Meetings once shared by Charles's and Camilla's teams were divided without warning. Officials called the changes procedural, but nobody misunderstood what had actually happened. Trust had been withdrawn. Camilla sat alone with the directive beside untouched coffee, removed her glasses, folded the page with careful precision, and asked her dresser to cancel a private dinner with friends. Anger had carried her through the confrontation, but isolation now stripped that strength away. For the first time, she looked less furious than abandoned. Charles entered quietly and saw the sealed envelope on the table. She asked whether he truly believed she had wanted Catherine harmed. The monarch answered that intent could not undo damage once it had been done. Camilla then asked whether he was speaking as her husband or as her king, and he stopped because no answer could protect both roles simultaneously. That question hangs over everything that followed. Elsewhere, Julian Mercer faced his own reckoning. Security officers deactivated his access pass and escorted him from the palace offices. Before leaving, the advisor told an official that Camilla had not been the only person aware of the briefing strategy. His recorded remarks suggested that others had quietly accepted the plan to weaken Catherine's return, and that possibility sent fresh fear through every corner of the household. Sophie carried the truth in a different way. She met Catherine privately and gave a documented account of the Windsor corridor, describing Mercer's folder, Camilla's expression, and the precise timing of their exchange. She apologized for remaining silent that night. Catherine accepted the apology, but told her that silence inside families often protects the wrong person. William later passed Camilla in a palace corridor. She began to speak, but the prince stepped aside and opened the door for his wife without answering. The queen watched them walk away together and understood that the emotional distance between them was now greater than any formal restriction could measure. Yet Catherine refused to turn pain into revenge. She told William that public humiliation would only deepen the damage. What she wanted was one honest conversation with Charles without advisors, documents, or strategy between them. She chose the garden room at Buckingham Palace because it belonged to quieter conversations, not official decisions. It carried no council table, no waiting aides, and no ceremonial pressure. Charles entered expecting demands. He assumed she would ask for harsher sanctions, fewer public duties for Camilla, or even her removal from important engagements. Instead, Catherine told him that his silence had wounded her almost as deeply as the leak itself. During her recovery, she had often wondered whether the monarchy valued her as a person or only as a stable symbol of its future. Discovering that her private struggle had become material for palace positioning confirmed the fear she had tried hardest to resist. Charles admitted he had delayed speaking because he hoped the conflict could be contained before the family fractured. Catherine answered that silence had not contained anything. It had forced her to carry the fracture alone while others decided how much truth she deserved. The king lowered his head and said she was right. For once, he offered no defense. Catherine then made the request he hadn't expected at all. She didn't want Camilla removed from public life. She wanted a direct acknowledgement of wrongdoing placed on record inside the family. A family record preserves what was admitted and decided, ensuring the event cannot later be rewritten as a misunderstanding. The princess needed the truth protected as firmly as her medical information should have been. Charles gave his answer through a recorded private conversation witnessed only by his secretary afterward. Camilla would never again receive medical or Wales household information without Catherine and William's explicit consent. The monarch also promised that the future of the institution would not be built by weakening those meant to inherit it. Catherine reached across the small table and turned a face-down family photograph upright. Protecting the family, she told him, did not mean pretending no one had failed. It meant refusing to let failure become the family's permanent language. By the following morning, the private reckoning had become impossible to conceal. At 7 o'clock, palace correspondents received a statement confirming that confidential information concerning Catherine had been shared without proper authority. By 8, every major broadcaster had abandoned its planned schedule. By 9, the words, "breach of family confidence" covered front pages across Britain. Charles's written announcement confirmed an inappropriate disclosure had occurred, introduced tighter confidentiality rules, and expressed complete confidence in the princess's return to duty. It did not identify Camilla by name, but the restrictions already imposed inside the household left little doubt about who had lost the king's trust. Broadcasters understood the significance immediately. News presenters described the announcement as the monarch's strongest public acknowledgement of conflict within his closest family. Commentators said he had chosen institutional trust and the future of the crown over the easier path of protecting a peaceful image. That mattered enormously because the monarchy depends on more than ceremony. It depends on the belief that private vulnerability will not be exploited by the people trusted to guard it. Public sympathy shifted with startling speed. For months, strangers had debated Catherine's absence, questioned her strength, and demanded answers about her recovery. Now they saw that the woman preparing to return had faced pressure not only from outside the palace, but from within it. The conversation changed from whether she was strong enough to why she had been forced to prove her strength at all. Camilla watched the coverage alone. When a presenter called Catherine the wronged future queen, she reached for the remote and turned off the television before the segment ended. The queen consort remained seated in silence, knowing the country had understood what the palace statement carefully refused to name. Outside Kensington Palace, several hundred people gathered behind barriers. When Catherine's car arrived, she stepped out unexpectedly, placed one hand over her heart, and nodded as applause rose around her. A woman near the gate called out that they were glad she came back, and the princess fought back tears before quietly thanking the crowd. Charles watched the footage from Buckingham Palace and asked for the volume to be raised. As he saw Catherine receive the support that silence had nearly destroyed, the king understood what his decision had restored: public trust. The final meeting that evening began without accusation. There was no document placed between them, no secretary recording every word, and no palace strategy left to debate. Charles had already made his decision, Catherine had already reclaimed her voice. What remained was harder than punishment. The truth spoken plainly, accepted without excuse, and carried forward by a family that could no longer survive through silence. Charles brought Catherine, William, and Camilla back into the same room where the confrontation had begun. But this time, the briefing note was gone. The king told them the facts had been established and the consequences would remain in force. Camilla would continue carrying out public duties beside him, but she would no longer take part in private planning involving Catherine's health, the Wales household, or future succession strategy. From that moment forward, every communication concerning Catherine would remain under her control and William's direct authority. Camilla looked at Catherine and spoke without defense. She admitted that insecurity had distorted her judgment. She had not protected the monarchy. She had used the princess's absence to protect her own relevance. The queen consort asked for no immediate forgiveness because she understood that an apology could not restore what her decision had destroyed. Catherine answered with calm precision that I find remarkable given everything she'd endured. Forgiveness, she said, did not return trust to its former place. Trust had to be rebuilt through conduct, not requested through words. Yet she also refused to let the betrayal become a permanent war that would damage their children, their duties, and the country they were meant to serve. Charles then named his own failure without prompting. He admitted that delaying the conflict had allowed the wound to deepen. Silence could look dignified, he told them, while quietly serving fear. His mistake had not been loving Camilla. It had been believing that love required him to avoid holding her accountable. That admission changed the entire room because the monarch no longer stood outside the failure. He accepted his share of it. Charles rose and opened the door himself. Catherine left first, with William beside her. Before Camilla followed, she removed the duplicate Wales briefing key from her handbag and placed it on the table, without being asked. A briefing key grants entry to protected royal information, and surrendering it confirmed that the boundary was permanent. Catherine returned to public duty with control over her schedule, the king's confidence, and the prince's unwavering support. She was no longer treated as a fragile figure whose future could be discussed in her absence. The confrontation established her authority before she ever wore a crown. Camilla's betrayal didn't destroy the monarchy, but it ended the culture that allowed ambition to disguise itself as protection. Charles preserved his reign not by denying the fracture, but by admitting it and choosing accountability. Catherine didn't win because another woman was humiliated. She won because her pain was believed, her dignity was defended, and her voice became impossible to ignore. When the palace doors closed that evening, nothing remained unresolved. Camilla had accepted the boundary, Charles had chosen accountability, and Catherine walked forward not as a protected figure, but as the undisputed future strength of the crown.